the continuation of lesson 1. So these are the 7 functions of life. A way to remember these functions of life is with the mnemonic Mr. H. Grin. You can imagine that that's someone's name. If you want to make up a story or think about what kind of person Mr. H. Grin might be, maybe that'll help you remember too. But each of those letters obviously stands for one of the 7 functions of life. I'm not going to read this. Feel free to pause the video if you need to copy anything. The most important thing for you as you learn to take notes is to process, make sure that you understand, ask questions, and then represent the information in your notes in a way that makes sense to you. If you're just copying a slide word for word, you're not really processing and you're not really learning. So take a look at this, see if anything's missing from your notes from when you were listening to me, and if you need to add something, you can do that now. Let's talk about the basic unit of life. So life forms can be a single unit. There's 2 of them. It's showing a unicellular freshwater organism called a paramecium. These are kind of slipper shaped. If you can see the kind of blurriness around their edges, it's because they have these little hair-like structures called cilia that actually beat, kind of like a crew team, and propel the paramecium forward. It has some different organelles that we'll talk about, but for now you need to know that this is an example of a unicellular organism. And here's an example of an organism with multiple units. So you don't need to know too much about this image, but I thought it was cool because you can see this is a zebrafish. The fertilized egg is just 1 cell, then we have 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, 16, and so on and so on. So the point is that organisms can be unicellular or they can be multicellular, but whether you're unicellular or multicellular, you need to be able to carry out all the functions of life. We consider a cell to be the basic unit of life. So just like if you had a Lego castle and you were breaking it apart piece by piece, eventually you would get to these individual pieces that were clearly their own basic units, so individual Legos. In the same way, if you can separate a multicellular organism into smaller and smaller pieces, eventually you'll get to these cells, which are the smallest building block. In this image, each brick-looking thing is 1 cell. And if you studied mitosis before, you might be able to recognize that these cells are undergoing mitosis. Here's one, here's another, here's another. And if you haven't learned about mitosis yet, we will learn about it this year. This is a little bit of an aside, but it's interesting. Viruses are not biologically alive. We could argue from a philosophical angle, but because they don't meet this definition of living things, they cannot perform the 7 functions of life on their own. They are not biologically alive. So viruses are really simple. They are some genetic information, DNA or RNA, surrounded by some kind of capsule or coat. So this one that looks like kind of a weird alien insect, it's actually a virus that infects bacteria. And it has a DNA here in the middle, and this capsule is made of protein. There's other viruses like the coronavirus where they have genetic material inside, and then their surrounding layer is made of fat or lipids, and that's why soap does such a great job of breaking apart that virus. But the point here is that because these cannot perform all 7 functions of life on their own, they are not considered living. So the way that viruses reproduce is they have to actually hijack or infect a host cell, and they use the host cell's own machinery, the host cell's own ribosomes and other parts to make more copies of themselves. So they couldn't do that without a host cell, so they can't reproduce on their own, so they don't meet the definition of a living thing. Okay, we're going to observe some of life's functions in a few videos. So the IB syllabus wants you to be able to describe the 7 functions of life in 2 unicellular organisms. One of those organisms needs to be a paramecium, and the other can be any photosynthetic unicellular organism. So it's any photosynthetic unicellular organism. So we picked Chlamydomonas. In past years, I've taught about chlorella. That's why there was a mistake on the slide originally. But they're both photosynthetic unicellular algae. So the way that they go about making their living is very similar. This is showing you more of the structure of what a paramecium looks like. They're kind of slipper shaped. They have these cilia that allow them to move. They have this structure called an oral groove, and then this is called a mouth. It's not a mouth exactly how you have a mouth, but it's where food is getting swept into the cell, and it makes this little structure called a vacuole. The other thing I want to highlight is this thing called a contractile vacuole. A contractile vacuole, it's like a little tiny pump. Okay. See if I can do this. Okay, great. So in this video, you can see one paramecium. It's still. You can see inside it, there's these little vacuoles that contain food particles. And this right here is the mouth. And all of that movement there is the cilia that are beating. And they're beating and they're beating and they're pushing food particles into this developing vacuole. Oh, look at that. The vacuole kind of broke off and became its own little bubble here. And the same thing is happening again, right? So the food particles are going in, and that's what happened. So that's showing you how the paramecium gets its nutrition. This is a longer video, so I probably won't play the whole thing, but this is one paramecium dividing into two paramecia. So it's performing the process of binary fission. You can see this like blurriness, which is the cilia. It's kind of long, so let's fast forward. Oh, we can see they've almost made it. Almost. You can do it. Oh. Oh. Come on. Almost. Okay, we're finally two separate organisms. So the paramecium has completed the process of asexual reproduction through binary fission. This is just showing you kind of a cartoon of what this looks like. So one paramecium gets bigger, its organelles, which are the structures inside it, grow, and eventually it gets big enough that it can divide in half and make two paramecia. This is a really cool video that's showing you how paramecia maintain homeostasis. So this structure here is the contractile vacuole. So these are freshwater organisms, and they don't have a cell wall, they have a cell membrane. So the tendency would be for water to cross that cell membrane and go into the cell of the paramecium. And that would be a problem because it would cause the paramecium to swell and swell and swell and potentially eventually burst. So the adaptation that they have, here it is again. It's having trouble focusing the microscope. Is this contractile vacuole. So it fills up with water, and then, there we go, squeezes out that excess water. And that's how the paramecium maintains homeostasis, because any excess water gets pumped out. So it keeps the amount of water inside the cell at a constant level so that it doesn't swell up and burst. In this video, I don't know if they did something to paralyze the contractile vacuole or what happened, but this is showing what happens if the contractile vacuole doesn't work. So there's the contractile vacuole right there. It kind of looks like a sunflower or sunburst shape. Contracts there. So it's pumping out excess water. But something happened and it's not contracting anymore. And if you watch, the paramecium is actually swelling up because it can't maintain homeostasis and it can't remove that excess water. And it looks to me like it's actually starting to leak. So it's definitely leaking now. Because it couldn't pump out the excess water, its cell membrane actually broke and it's leaking out into the environment. Goes on for a little bit. Okay, whoa, that looks really bad. So this is definitely a dead paramecium at this point. Because the contractile vacuole didn't work, it couldn't perform homeostasis. It took in too much water and then actually burst. Oh no, look at all those organelles. That's just spilling its guts all over the place. So the point is, the failure of homeostasis meant that this paramecium couldn't stay alive. Okay, your task to finish your notes, as long as you have the definitions of the 7 functions of life, your next task is to use your textbook, page 9 and 10, to fill in the comparison chart for the functions of life in paramecium and Chlamydomonas. Walete.